There are places so hidden on the map that even time forgets them. And in one of those places, a broken man stumbled across a dying Mustang lying in silence by a frozen stream. What he didn't know was that this half-starved horse wasn't waiting to die. He was waiting for someone to believe in him. What happened next would change the man's life and countless others forever. The wind through Trinity Pass had a voice of its own, low, steady, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone, whispering across ridgelines that hadn't felt the tread of boots in decades. Ethan Cole tightened the straps on his canvas backpack and paused to listen. Not for danger, for silence, for the kind of stillness that went deeper than the ears and into the bones. He hadn't heard it in years. Some people hiked to reach peaks, others to prove something to themselves. But Ethan, he wandered the backcountry of Idaho to forget the way Marlene used to call his name from the kitchen, to forget the sound of her laughter echoing through the fire tower the night before it all turned to ash, to forget that since the wildfire took her, nothing else in the world had made much sense. Now, at 47, he moved through wilderness like a shadow. A former federal ranger turned wildlife photographer, he lived alone in a refurbished Airstream trailer on the edge of nowhere. His only companions were his camera, a battered thermos, and the ghosts that never stopped talking. That morning, the air was crisp with October bite. Maple leaves blushed deep crimson along the creek beds, and the sky above the pass was the kind of blue that hurt to look at for too long. Ethan had been following elk tracks along a dry ravine when he noticed something odd, rocks scattered like spilled marbles, saplings bent unnaturally, the earth disturbed. A rock slide? He wondered, adjusting the brim of his weathered field cap. The terrain here wasn't prone to movement, but nature didn't ask permission. He moved cautiously, boots skimming across shale, ducking under fallen limbs. That was when he saw it, a crack in the wall of the mountainside, thin as a secret, nearly hidden behind a tangle of alder brush. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a shadow between stones, but the air drifting out from it was cooler, wetter, alive. Ethan hesitated only a moment before sliding sideways through the gap, and stepped into a world the rest of Idaho had forgotten. The valley beyond was silent in the way cathedrals are, holy, heavy, timeless. Ancient pines stood sentinel along the perimeter, their trunks straight and proud. A stream, clear as melted glass, wound lazily through beds of moss and wild asters. The sun filtered through the trees in golden shafts that caught on dust motes and spider silk, painting everything in a glow that felt otherworldly. He exhaled softly. "Damn," he whispered, almost reverently. "Where have you been hiding?" He snapped a few shots with his camera out of instinct, but then lowered it. This place didn't need to be captured. It needed to be respected. He was about to move toward the stream when he saw it, a shape lying beside the water. At first, he thought it was a fallen log, the way the light hit it, the matted texture, but then his stomach tightened. It was too smooth, too curved. A horse? No. A wild Mustang. Ethan dropped his pack with a thud and crouched, the instinct from years in ranger service kicking in. The stallion lay on its side, ribs prominent beneath patchy skin, limbs folded awkwardly. Its once glorious coat, probably bay or sorrel in better days, was now dull, coated in grime. Flies hovered lazily around its ears. There was no movement. Dead? He edged closer. Then the eye fluttered. Just once. Ethan froze. The stallion wasn't dead, but close. So damn close. "Hey there, big guy," he said softly, squatting low and extending a hand, palm up. "You alive in there?" The horse didn't move. No flinch, no tremble, just a ragged breath that barely stirred its sides. Years of experience had taught Ethan what to expect from a wild animal near death. Fear. Fight. flee if there was any energy left. But this one did nothing, just watched him. Ethan leaned in, voice gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you." Then something happened that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. The stallion, with agonizing slowness, turned its head. Their eyes met man and beast. And in that instant, Ethan felt something shift. It wasn't fear in those eyes, not pain, not even resignation. It was recognition. As if the horse had been waiting for him. The air around them seemed to hold its breath. Ethan knelt fully now, ignoring the cold seeping through his jeans. He reached out once more. The stallion, impossibly, moved its muzzle forward, and with the barest of effort, pressed it into Ethan's hand. Emotion surged unexpectedly in Ethan's chest. His throat tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't nature. This was something else. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell happened to you?" He scanned the area. The valley showed no signs of struggle, no predator prints, no trap scars. The vegetation was thick, the water clean. A horse should have thrived here. But then he noticed the rock formation near the far end of the valley boulders piled unnaturally. Recent, as if something had collapsed. He stood, walked over, and confirmed it. The only entrance, narrow and easily missed, was blocked by tons of stone. The very gap he had slipped through had only been recently exposed, likely from rain-loosening debris. The stallion hadn't come in here. He'd been trapped. Ethan returned to the horse, kneeling again. "You've been stuck," he murmured. "No way in or out. Just you. Alone." The stallion blinked slowly, almost in answer. Ethan ran a hand through his beard, mind racing. The horse was dying, there was no doubt. Starvation, dehydration, exhaustion, it was all there. And yet, somehow, he'd survived this long enough to meet the one human reckless enough to step through a forgotten crack in the mountain. Coincidence? Maybe. But Ethan had stopped believing in coincidence the day the fire took everything from him. "I don't know how I'm supposed to help you," he admitted aloud. "No signal, no radio, 15 miles back to the road, and you're not walking anywhere anytime soon." The stallion stirred again, this time just slightly. A shallow breath, a shift in one rear hoof, scraping the soil as if trying to rise, but giving up. Ethan reached for his pack, pulled out his collapsible water bottle, and unscrewed the cap. Using a tin cup, he poured a few ounces and offered it. To his disbelief, the stallion drank, slowly, carefully. "Okay," Ethan whispered. "Okay, big guy, we'll start here." He wasn't sure what he was promising yet, but whatever this was, whatever this moment meant, it had reached into something buried deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. He had come looking for silence, but what he found was a whisper, and it wanted to live. By late afternoon, the golden light in the valley had softened to amber. The air had grown still, so quiet that Ethan could hear the individual ticks of his old field watch. Time moved differently in this place, slower, heavier. The Mustang still hadn't moved much, but he was breathing. That alone felt like a miracle. Ethan sat cross-legged beside him, refilling the collapsible cup with another measure of water. The stallion's lips twitched, then parted slowly to accept the offering. No resistance, no flinch, no whites of the eyes flashing like most wild horses would have shown. It was cooperation. Ethan shook his head. "You are something else, you know that?" The stallion, for all appearances, seemed barely tethered to life. His flanks were hollow, his muscles atrophied, and his hooves, Ethan now noticed, were worn and cracked, edges chipped from pacing. As if the poor beast had spent days, maybe weeks, circling this place, trying to find an escape. "Damn," Ethan muttered under his breath. He knew enough about horses to tell this one had once been powerful, probably the lead stallion of a herd. He had the height, the build, the proud arch of the neck, that still lingered beneath the bones. There was nobility there, even in ruin. "Where's your herd?" Ethan asked quietly, as if expecting an answer. "Did they get out before the rocks fell?" No reply, of course, just the deep exhale of a horse who seemed to be watching him as much as he was being watched. That eye dark, glassy, yet holding something aware. Too aware. Ethan reached slowly, fingers outstretched, letting the stallion see him clearly. This time the horse didn't just allow the touch, he leaned into it. His soft muzzle found Ethan's palm and rested there, warm and trembling. There it was again, that inexplicable gesture, one that didn't belong in any wildlife manual. He whispered, "You're not acting like any wild horse I've ever met." As the light shifted, Ethan stood and took slow steps around the edge of the valley, trying to understand the layout, think like a trapped animal. He traced the perimeter, moving along the brush, eyes scanning the trees and rocks. There was no alternate path, no secret trail. The canyon was completely sealed, except for the narrow breach he himself had squeezed through. If that rock slide hadn't shifted just enough for him to slip in, "You'd have died here," he said aloud. He looked back toward the stallion. The horse was watching him, not just watching, tracking. Ethan could feel it. It wasn't that strange prey-predator tension. It was something else. Like the horse was waiting, measuring him, trusting him with every second that passed. He walked back slowly. "You know I'm your only shot, don't you?" The stallion's nostrils flared slightly, and he let out a quiet, breathy snort. It wasn't aggressive. If anything, it sounded like acknowledgement. Ethan let out a long sigh and dropped back to the ground beside him. "All right, buddy, I guess that makes two of us out here with no backup." He rummaged through his backpack, counting out what remained. 2 protein bars, 1 pouch of trail mix, a pouch of powdered electrolytes. None of it was made for horses, but if this one didn't eat something soon, he wouldn't make it through the night. "You're gonna hate me for this," Ethan said, half to himself. He unwrapped a protein bar, broke it into chunks, and soaked them in a bit of water to make a mash. He held it under the stallion's nose. To his surprise, the horse sniffed it and ate, slowly, deliberately, like every bite was something he understood mattered. "That's it," Ethan encouraged. "We'll call this 5-star Valley service." He reached out again, brushing mud from the horse's bony neck. His fingers caught in tangled hair, debris wedged in knots along the mane. Bits of twig, clumps of moss. A pine needle so tightly woven in it must have been there for weeks. Ethan worked at the knots slowly, gently, careful not to pull. The stallion let him. The sun dipped lower, shadows growing long. Somewhere, far beyond the ridge, a hawk called. Ethan turned to look out of instinct, but when he looked back, the horse had moved, just a few inches. But the movement was deliberate. He had inched closer. It hit Ethan then, with an ache that went straight to the ribs. This animal had been entirely alone. No herd, no contact, just survival. And now a stranger touches him, feeds him, talks to him. And he leans in? Ethan didn't know whether to be amazed or heartbroken. He whispered, "You don't even know me." The stallion didn't move away. "Guess we're both broken in our own ways, huh?" Ethan leaned back, folding his arms behind his head and watching the first stars blink into the darkening sky. A chill was settling in. He pulled his thermal jacket tighter and debated setting up camp, but he didn't want to leave the stallion, even to gather wood. He pulled out the emergency blanket from his pack and covered the horse's flank. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, under the velvet Idaho sky, Ethan found himself talking. Quietly, honestly. He told the stallion about Marlene, about the wildfire that ate through their cabin like it was made of straw, about the sirens, the smoke, the way he screamed her name for hours before anyone pulled him out of the rubble, about how silence used to be his friend until it became a prison. "I came up here to stop feeling," he said softly, "to stop connecting, to be just another ghost in the pines." He looked at the horse, but now here you are. There was no reply, just the slow rise and fall of ribs under the emergency blanket. But Ethan felt something shift. In him. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe the horse wouldn't survive another 24 hours. But something sacred had been passed between them, a silent agreement. He didn't need to understand it. He just needed to honor it. The next morning broke cold and pale. Mist clung to the low grass like breath on glass. Ethan's bones ached from the hard ground, but he sat up fast, eyes darting to the stallion. Still breathing, still here. He exhaled in relief. "Damn you stubborn old bastard." He fed him more soaked protein bar mash and trickled water again, whispering encouragement. Then came the hard part. He had to leave. Ethan stood, strapping on his gear. The stallion lifted his head, not much, just a few inches, but enough to notice. Ethan bent down. "I have to go," he said. "I need to get help." "You won't make it another 2 days without proper care." The horse stared at him, unblinking. Ethan felt a knot in his throat. "I know it's asking a lot, but I need you to hang on." He hesitated, then knelt and placed his palm on the stallion's forehead. "I've walked away from a lot of things in my life," he whispered. "But not you. I swear it." And then it happened. Whisper, because that's what Ethan was now calling him, reached out with his muzzle, slowly, deliberately, and pressed it ever so gently against Ethan's chest, right over his heart. The man froze. And in that stillness, something ancient passed between them. It wasn't just trust, it was faith. Ethan swallowed hard, stood up, and turned toward the mountains. He had 15 miles to cover, but he wasn't walking away. He was walking toward a promise. The first mile of the descent was all instinct and adrenaline. Ethan's boots moved with practiced rhythm, his balance steady across slick moss and shifting shale, but his thoughts were with the horse whisper lying alone in that sealed-off valley. Every step away felt heavier, like gravity wasn't pulling from the earth, but from something unspoken between them. A thread had formed, invisible, unbreakable. He glanced back once at the rock seam he'd slipped through just hours earlier. It looked even narrower from this angle, almost vanishing into the cliff face. If he hadn't seen it from the inside, he wouldn't believe there was an entire world hidden beyond it. A horse on the brink of death, a bond forged in absolute silence, a whisper that had chosen not to run. Ethan pushed forward. The temperature dropped as the sun sank behind the spires of Trinity Pass. Shadows stretched across the path, and the scent of cold spruce mixed with distant wood smoke, a reminder that civilization, though faint, was still out there, somewhere. By the time he reached the halfway ridge, night had swallowed the mountains. He unzipped a side pocket, pulled out a small headlamp, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, catching branches, boulders, and once startling a raccoon that chattered angrily before vanishing into the underbrush. The trail narrowed, roots clawed at his ankles. Rocks shifted underfoot. His breath came heavier now, but he didn't slow. Not tonight. Whisper had trusted him, and Ethan Cole did not break promises. He reached the summit trailhead just before midnight. From here, the ridge line flattened enough to catch a signal. He unslung his pack, set it against a log, and pulled out his sat phone. The battery blinked red. "Just hold on," he muttered, scrolling through saved contacts. Lauren Taggart, vet, she answered on the second ring. "Ethan?" Her voice was groggy, uncertain. "It's the middle of the damn night. I need your help." His voice was hoarse, raw, bad. A pause, then her tone sharpened. "What happened?" "I found a Mustang, stallion, probably 15 years old. Starving, dehydrated, trapped in a valley behind Trinity Pass. Looks like a rock slide sealed it off weeks ago. Silence. Then, is he alive? Barely, Ethan said. But yeah, and he's different, Lauren. Different how? He let me touch him, feed him. Hell, he reached out to me. This isn't normal behavior for any wild horse, let alone one in that condition. Lauren was quiet for a beat. Then, gently, Ethan, are you sure you're not projecting? You've been out there alone for a long... He pressed his muzzle against my chest, Ethan cut in, like he knew what I promised, like it meant something. Another pause. Then she exhaled. Okay, I believe you. What's your plan? I need you and someone with airlift access. I'll grab my trauma kit and be on the road in an hour. You said Trinity Pass? Yeah, the trailhead's at the south end. I'll text you coordinates. Ethan disconnected, exhaled, then opened another contact. Jasper Quinn, Timberline Rescue. If anyone could pull off an extraction this insane, it was Jasper. The phone rang longer this time. Who the hell dies tonight? Jasper grumbled, voice thick with sleep. Nobody yet, Ethan replied. But I've got a stallion who might, unless you get your ass up here. Ethan? Yeah. This some kind of joke? I found a Mustang. We need to get him out of a sealed valley. Airlift's the only way. You're serious. As a heart attack. Jasper muttered something that sounded like, you damn hermit, then sighed. Send me the grid. I'll bring the bird. You'll owe me beers for the rest of your life. I already do. They hung up. Ethan looked out over the forest below, stretching endlessly in every direction. Pines in silhouette. A few scattered stars overhead, but his mind was back in the forgotten place. Back with the horse that had chosen trust over flight. He felt the weight of it settle on him like a mantle. This wasn't just rescue, it was redemption. He slept barely 3 hours, curled beside his gear, and woke before dawn. Lauren's pickup rumbled up the mountain road just as the first light broke over the ridge. She stepped out, dark hair braided back, eyes alert despite the coffee thermos in hand. You look like hell. Feel like it, Ethan said. She tossed him a protein bar. Catch. Jasper arrived next, piloting his old but reliable MD 500 chopper. The moment the rotors wound down, he hopped out in his flight suit, grinning. You always call me for the dumbest jobs, Cole. This one's different, Ethan said. Jasper looked between him and Lauren. How bad's the terrain? Steep, sealed on 3 sides. Only entrance is a crevice I squeeze through. And the horse? Too weak to move. But if we can stabilize him, maybe, just maybe, he can walk out. Jasper shook his head. You're crazy. Ethan just smiled grimly. Probably. They packed essentials. IV fluid kits, electrolyte supplements, emergency rations, painkillers, stretchers, ropes, and harnesses. Lauren double-checked every medical item with calm, methodical hands. Jasper rechecked weather data. Ethan mapped the tightest route back. Then he said the words that felt heavier than any pack he'd carried. I left him alone all night. Lauren looked up sharply. You think he'll hold on? Ethan didn't answer. He just slung the gear over his shoulder and started walking. It was a long hike back to the breach. The temperature rose with the sun, baking the trail and making the air shimmer. Lauren kept pace beside him, quiet but present. Occasionally she asked a question. Does he have wounds? No, just starving, severely dehydrated. Hooves are cracked to hell. Any signs of trauma? No, but his body's wasted, tail's tangled, mane's matted with debris. He's been trying to get out. She nodded. That kind of desperation leaves damage. They reached the breach around noon. Ethan dropped his pack, knelt, and slipped through first. What he saw on the other side stopped him cold. Whisper was standing, only a few feet from the stream, head low, legs trembling, but upright. "Holy," Ethan whispered, breath catching. The horse turned his head, eyes locked onto Ethan. And then, a soft nicker, low, familiar. A greeting. Ethan felt tears welling, unbidden. "You're still here," he whispered. "You waited." He stepped forward slowly. Whisper didn't move, didn't back away. He just watched with calm, intelligent stillness. When Ethan got close, the stallion leaned forward and touched his chest again, right where he had the night before. Lauren climbed through behind him, breath catching as she saw. "My God!" Jasper followed, wide-eyed. "I'll be damned." Lauren approached with slow reverence, crouching to scan the horse's condition. "He shouldn't be standing," she murmured, "let alone greeting us." "He's not just surviving," Ethan said softly. "He's choosing." Lauren looked up at him. "I don't say this lightly, Ethan, but this might be the most extraordinary animal I've ever seen." They set up the medical station with care, administering IV fluids, hydrating his cracked hooves, applying a soothing salve to sore muscles. Whisper accepted every procedure without panic. When Lauren needed to insert a needle, he leaned into Ethan's side for support. Even Jasper was speechless. Afterward, as the sun dipped low once more and the air cooled, Ethan knelt beside the horse, pressing his forehead gently to Whisper's. "I told you I'd come back," he said. Whisper closed his eyes. That night, under starlight and silence, man and horse lay side by side. And Ethan Cole, for the first time since fire had stolen everything, felt something stir in the ashes. Hope. The next morning came with a bite in the air, crisp and clear. The kind of mountain cold that settled deep in your bones and reminded you exactly how far you were from comfort. But Ethan didn't feel it. He was already awake, crouched by the stream refilling a canteen, eyes never far from Whisper. The stallion was alert now more than Ethan expected after all he'd endured. He stood gingerly on his legs, shifting his weight with caution, but the spark in his eye was undeniable. There was intelligence there, awareness, a quiet will to survive. Lauren emerged from her sleeping role, rubbing warmth into her hands. "He make it through the night okay?" Ethan glanced at her, then back at the horse. "Yeah, better than expected." "Better than medically expected," she corrected. "That horse shouldn't be upright." Jasper, ever the realist, was already tinkering with his sat phone. "Then we better not waste time. We've got a tight window today, cloud covers moving in by late afternoon. If we're going to airlift him, we need to stabilize him and walk him out." Ethan stood and brushed dust from his pants. "I've been thinking about that." Lauren shot him a look. "Uh-oh." Ethan smiled faintly. "We can't airlift him from this valley. The terrain's too tight, the approach too narrow. We're going to have to walk him to that ridge clearing 2 miles east, up the gradual incline past the old beaver dam." Jasper raised an eyebrow. "You think that horse can walk 2 miles?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I know he can." Whisper lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's voice, ears flicking forward. Lauren followed his gaze. "Well, he seems to agree." They spent the next hour building a makeshift recovery harness, adapted from mountaineering gear and equine rescue straps. Whisper allowed them to work around his chest and legs, never flinching, not once. He watched them with quiet curiosity, as if he were the one supervising their work. Lauren stood back finally and shook her head in disbelief. "He's letting us help him." Ethan approached slowly and placed a hand on Whisper's neck. "He's not letting us. He's choosing us." Jasper snorted. "This whole thing's insane, but let's do it." They moved out by mid-morning, Whisper walking between Ethan and Lauren. Every few steps, the stallion would pause, test his footing, then continue leaning ever so slightly toward Ethan's side for balance. The climb out of the hidden valley was gradual at first, winding past mossy boulders and patches of aspen that glittered gold in the sunlight. But after half a mile, the trail narrowed and steepened. Whisper began to falter. Ethan paused, resting a hand on the stallion's shoulder. "You okay, bud?" Whisper lowered his head and exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Lauren stepped forward. "We can give him a dose of the electrolyte booster here. Might buy us a bit more strength." "Do it," Ethan said. As she prepped the syringe, Ethan crouched low and whispered, "Remember what I told you? We walk out of here together." Whisper didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. The injection was quick. Whisper flinched, then steadied. Jasper radioed in from a few yards ahead. "We're about halfway. Ridge clearings in sight from the next rise. Helicopters staged and waiting. We'll need to bring him in fast once we crest that hill." The stallion took a few shaky steps forward, then more, then steadied again. It was grueling. At times, Ethan doubted himself. Each incline tested Whisper's stamina and their trust in each other. At one particularly steep patch, Whisper stopped cold. His legs shook. He turned his head slightly, eyes locking with Ethan's. Ethan stepped close, pressing his forehead to the stallion's. "You're not alone. I'm right here." He felt the exhale against his chest. Then, slowly, Whisper lifted his hoof and moved forward. When they finally crested the rise, the wind caught them full in the face. The clearing stretched before them like an open window into the sky, a patch of bare land flattened by years of wind and elk traffic, with just enough space for Jasper's chopper to land. Jasper broke into a jog. "We've got a green zone." Ethan turned to Whisper. "You did it. One more step." But as they approached the center of the clearing, the helicopter came into view, and with it the thunderous whomp 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 of the rotors. Whisper froze, his entire body tensed. Ethan stepped in quickly. "Easy, easy, big guy. It's loud, yeah, but it's not going to hurt you." The stallion tossed his head, hooves shifting uncertainly. Lauren grabbed Ethan's sleeve. "He's going into flight mode." Ethan moved in front of Whisper, placing both hands on his muzzle. "Hey, look at me. Look at me. I promised I'd get you out. This is the only way." The helicopter began its descent, whipping dust and leaves into the air. The sound was deafening now. Jasper waved them back, signaling readiness, but Whisper didn't bolt. Instead, he pressed his head forward and rested it gently against Ethan's chest. The world around them roared, but in that space between their hearts, it was silent. Lauren blinked rapidly. "Ethan, he trusts you completely." He nodded once. "Let's get him ready." They wrapped the recovery harness snugly, securing straps beneath his chest and behind his hind legs. Whisper stood still throughout, watching Ethan. When the lift rig was engaged and the final checks completed, Jasper gave the signal. "Clear to lift." The winch began its hum. The straps tightened. Whisper shifted, but didn't panic. Ethan kept his hand on the stallion's muzzle. "I've got you." As the hooves lifted off the ground, Whisper stretched his neck forward, eyes never leaving Ethan. Even as he rose into the sky, he reached toward him until the last moment, when the harness swung gently and carried him toward the waiting chopper. Lauren turned, wiping her face. "That's not instinct. That's trust." Ethan exhaled. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the weight of what had just happened. Whisper had placed his fate, his life in Ethan's hands, and not once had he hesitated. As the chopper rose over the tree line, vanishing into the northern sky, Ethan felt something inside him shift again. Something cracked. Something healed. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough. Enough to keep going. The wind gusted over the clearing as the helicopter disappeared into the pale Idaho sky, carrying with it not just a dying stallion, but the weight of a promise Ethan Cole had never intended to make. He stood there in the rotor wash aftermath, dust still swirling at his feet, adrenaline ebbing from his limbs like the retreat of a tide. Lauren approached him slowly, her dark braid undone by the wind, her face pinched with a tension that matched his. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan's voice cracked. "I don't know." She looked toward the sky where the chopper had vanished. "You did it. You kept your word." Ethan didn't respond. Not yet. Not until he saw Whisper again. The veterinary facility at Timberline Rescue was nestled deep within a pine valley, miles from the nearest paved road, and built to handle the most extreme cases in wildlife medicine. It wasn't fancy, no glossy white tile or air-conditioned lobbies, but it was functional, rugged, and built by people who understood that animals didn't heal in sterile glass boxes. Whisper arrived by sling just before sundown. Dr. Mason Carver-Lead, trauma specialist and retired field vet from Montana's Wild Horse Division, was waiting with a team of 3 techs. He didn't expect much. A Mustang pulled from a remote valley, starved down to bones, dehydrated, with no known history of human contact? The horse would arrive feral, panicked, perhaps even dead, before they could stabilize him. Instead, the chopper touched down, the sling lowered, and Whisper stood still, not just calm, but aware. As the team approached, Whisper turned his head slowly and scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on Ethan. Then he nickered, low, quiet, soft as wind over prairie grass. Dr. Carver blinked in confusion. That horse just greeted him." Lauren grinned. "Wait till you see what else he does." They gently transferred Whisper to a large open-air stall. The structure was quiet, dimly lit, surrounded by canvas walls to block wind and reduce stress. No other animals were housed nearby. The goal was complete focus, minimal stimulation, total calm. Ethan stood just outside the stall, arms crossed, heart pounding. Whisper lay down without resistance. His eyes, still sharp, flicked toward Ethan as he moved closer. "Hey," Ethan murmured. "Told you I'd be here." The stallion closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them again. Dr. Carver was in disbelief. "I've worked with horses 30 years, he said under his breath. "You don't get this kind of behavior, not even with domestic rescues. Not unless they've been trained for years. And this one looks at him like he knows him." Lauren stepped up beside him. "He does. That's Ethan. And Ethan's the reason he's alive." Over the next 2 hours, the team worked efficiently drawing blood, administering IV fluids, trimming and cleaning hooves, and starting specialized refeeding protocols. Whisper allowed all of it. No tranquilizer, no restraint. Just the quiet pressure of Ethan's hand resting on his neck and a constant low stream of reassurance. "You're okay, bud. We're getting there." When one of the techs moved a little too fast with the hoof rasp, Whisper flinched slightly. But he didn't kick, didn't rear, just turned his head toward Ethan as if to check, "Are we still good?" And Ethan, calm as ever, nodded. "You're safe." By nightfall, the tests were in. "Severe muscle atrophy," Dr. Carver said. "Electrolyte imbalance, organ stress, the usual signs of starvation trauma. But his vitals are shockingly stable." "How shockingly?" Ethan asked. Carver scratched his head, like he should be in a coma, but instead he's engaged, responsive. "Every time I look at the chart, I think someone made a mistake, but they didn't." Lauren crossed her arms. "I've seen this before. Once. In Afghanistan. A dog refused to die until his handler came back. They called it bonded survival instinct. Whisper's doing the same thing." Dr. Carver raised an eyebrow. "Then the key to this horse's recovery isn't going to be meds. It's him," he said, nodding toward Ethan. Ethan didn't leave the stall. Not that night, not the next. He slept on a canvas cot in the corner, drank coffee from a thermos that tasted like burnt pine needles, and watched Whisper with the kind of focus usually reserved for men guarding secrets or saints watching over sacred relics. He told him stories about Ranger School, about Marlene, about the fire, the things he hadn't said out loud in years. Whisper didn't judge. He just listened. One afternoon, 3 days in, Whisper took his first real steps inside the recovery. Pen slow, deliberate, but confident. Lauren watched from behind the wire gate, her eyes glassy. He shouldn't be walking yet. Ethan smiled softly. He's not just walking. Whisper was following. A week later, the team allowed him to graze in the rehab paddock. The first time he felt grass beneath his hooves again, Whisper paused, then lay down, not in collapse, but in relief. He rolled gently, side to side, like a dog discovering a bed after too long on concrete. Ethan stood by the fence, arms crossed, quiet. Lauren approached. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "I think I am." "You've been through it too, you know," she said. "You've just been hiding better." He didn't argue, didn't need to. That night, as the air cooled and dusk painted the paddock in soft oranges and purples, Whisper walked up to the fence. He stopped just in front of Ethan, then did the thing he had done on the day they met. He pressed his muzzle gently against Ethan's chest, right over his heart. This time, Ethan didn't just close his eyes, he broke, and for the first time in years, he let himself feel all of it. By day 10, Whisper's weight had stabilized. His blood panel showed progress. Dr. Carver declared him medically still a miracle. And Lauren scheduled his physical therapy schedule in increments based entirely on his moods, because Whisper would only cooperate when Ethan was present. But what surprised the team most wasn't his recovery. It was what happened next. In the stall adjacent to Whisper's, a young elk calf had been brought in 2 nights earlier, suffering from a compound leg fracture and severe stress. The animal refused food, refused treatment, attacked anyone who entered. Until Whisper approached, he didn't do anything dramatic, just stood quietly near the stall door. Then, slowly, stretched his neck over the gate just far enough to nudge the air beside the calf's ear. The calf froze. Then, after a long moment, stopped trembling. 20 minutes later, it accepted food for the first time. Lauren blinked at the chart. "What the hell?" Ethan just smiled. "He remembers what it felt like," he said. "To be alone, afraid, forgotten." Dr. Carver was already taking notes. Whatever Whisper had survived hadn't just shaped him. It had transformed him. At the end of that second week, as stars bled into the dusk sky and pines rustled under mountain wind, Whisper stood at the edge of his paddock. Ethan approached, boots soft in the dust. Whisper turned, ears forward. They looked at each other for a long time. No words, just a knowing. Then once again, Whisper stepped close. And in the silence that followed, he pressed his head into Ethan's chest. One more time. One more whisper, one more vow. We're still in this together. The snow came earlier than expected that year. By mid-November, the hills surrounding Timberline Rescue had traded their copper autumn for drifts of soft white. The mornings turned sharp, breath puffed in clouds, and the pine trees stood dusted like ornaments in a forgotten Christmas town. For most of the world, it meant slowing down, hunkering in. But not for Ethan and Whisper. Not now. The stallion was stronger every day. The lines of starvation had softened, muscle slowly returned, his coat beginning to shine again beneath a blanket of gray-silver fuzz that shimmered in the cold. But what truly shocked the staff wasn't his physical progress. It was how he responded to suffering, and how others responded to him. It started with the elk calf. By week 3, the calf had not only begun eating again, but was up on all 4 legs, bandaged and braced, following Whisper along the rehab fence like a shadow. A few days later, a wolf pup arrived mother killed in a snare trap, one hind leg partially amputated. The pup was inconsolable, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, bit 2 techs in its first hour. Then Whisper approached. Again, just a quiet stance, stillness, presence. The pup stopped trembling, then curled into the hay and slept. That night, Lauren walked up to Ethan, her face drawn, clipboard loose in hand. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It's like he can feel what they feel." Lauren shook her head. "No, it's more than empathy. It's like he reminds them how to trust again." Whisper's stall became the quiet heart of timberline. Wounded raccoons, injured deer, foxes recovering from roadside trauma all gravitated toward the fence line near him. Some leaned close, some simply lay down beside it. But every single one seemed calmer, grounded. "He's becoming something else," Dr. Carver murmured one afternoon as he watched Whisper stretch his neck toward a skittish owl with a clipped wing. "He's not just recovering, he's helping others heal." The change in Ethan was just as profound. He no longer hovered like a shadow. He no longer watched from the sidelines. He was slowly, awkwardly at first, participating. He helped Lauren run vitals, built new fencing, trained junior staff on wilderness first aid, and, eventually, he began teaching again. Something he hadn't done since the year before the fire. On the first Saturday of December, Timberline hosted a small open house for wildlife rehab students. Lauren had insisted. "People need to see this," she said. Ethan was reluctant at first, but when he saw Whisper walk toward the fence line head held high, no limp, eyes bright, he nodded once. Okay. The group that arrived wasn't big. 15 or so students from nearby state colleges, bundled in layers and boots, notebooks in hand, wary excitement in their voices. When they saw Whisper, they froze. Even from a distance, the stallion held attention like gravity. "He's beautiful," one young woman whispered. "No halter? No enclosure?" another asked. "He doesn't need it," Lauren replied. Ethan stepped forward, hands in his jacket pockets. "He's still wild, but he chose trust, and that changes everything." They watched as a rescued fawn approached the shared fence line and nuzzled against Whisper's shoulder. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Dr. Carver leaned against the post nearby. "This is not standard behavior. There's no scientific explanation for what you're seeing." "Then maybe," Ethan said quietly, "it's not supposed to be explained." But the world has a way of noticing miracles. 2 weeks later, a journalist from National Geographic reached out. Word had spread through veterinary circles and conservation forums. A wild stallion not only rescued, but healing others? They called it the Whisper phenomenon. Ethan didn't like the spotlight, but he understood the value of story. He sat for the interview, told the truth, every word. When the article came out, it changed everything. Donations poured into Timberline. Requests for rescue consults doubled. Documentary teams called. And the name Whisper, a name Ethan had whispered in a sealed valley to a dying horse, was suddenly being spoken around the world. Fame, though, brings pressure. One winter morning, just after Christmas, a black SUV pulled into the drive. A man in a tailored coat stepped out, flanked by 2 associates in polished boots. The patch on his sleeve read, U.S. Bureau of Wildland Recovery. "Ethan Cole?" the man asked. Ethan stepped off the porch slowly. "Yeah." "My name's Clay Hensley. I'm with the BWR. We've been monitoring this facility's operation." "We're not violating anything," Ethan said calmly. "I'm not here to shut you down," Hensley replied. "But that stallion, he was never officially documented, not registered, not tagged. Technically, he's still government property under the Wild Mustang Protection Act." Ethan's jaw tensed. "You're not taking him." "I'm not here to take him," Hensley clarified. But I need to know, when he's fully recovered, what's your intention? Lauren stepped up. He's bonded. He can't be released, not without trauma. Hensley looked at Whisper, standing by the paddock, watching. Look, he said, his tone softening. Off the record? That horse isn't just healing. He's changing people. We're not blind to it. He handed Ethan a folder. Write it up. Submit a sanctuary designation. Make it official. We'll sign off. He paused. But just know, if you ever do decide to turn him loose, he'll never come back. Ethan watched as the man walked away. The words echoed. He'll never come back. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood by the paddock under a moon full enough to see the frost glittering on the rails. Whisper walked up quietly, pressed his head against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan whispered, I'll never make you choose between freedom and family. Not ever. January brought storms, freezing rain, sleet, then snow that piled 2 feet high in a night. Timberline hunkered down, but even then, amid blackout nights and iced-over paths. Whisper remained a beacon. He stood watch over the paddocks, rested near the most vulnerable animals. Once, when a doe in post-surgical shock began seizing, Whisper broke through the gate and lay beside her until her spasms stopped. When the power came back, Lauren turned to Ethan and said, You've got something here that science will never explain. Ethan smiled. I'm not trying to explain him. She cocked her head. What then? I'm just listening. And that, perhaps, was the greatest truth. Whisper didn't demand anything. He didn't need noise or control or recognition. All he gave again and again was presence. A calm breath, a gentle gaze. A quiet reminder that even the broken can be the ones who heal. As February approached, the snow began to melt, slowly, reluctantly. The valley turned wet, streams swelled. And with it came a new rhythm, a preparation for spring, and all that might follow. One morning, Ethan opened the gate to the paddock. He didn't call, didn't urge, just stood there. Whisper walked out, freely, paused by the edge of the field, looked back, and waited. Ethan caught up, boots crunching in snowmelt. They stood together at the edge of the world they'd rebuilt, side by side, gazing out over the thawing forest. You're not just a horse, Ethan murmured. Whisper exhaled softly, pressing his head once more. Once always against Ethan's chest. And together they stepped forward into what came next. The spring thaw arrived in waves. What had once been a land of silence and frost was now a living canvas of rebirth. Snowmelt trickled down the mountainsides of Trinity Pass, carving new paths between fir roots and granite. The air carried the smell of wet earth and pine needles, and the call of migrating birds echoed over the hills. Life, as it always did, returned. But at Timberline Rescue, it didn't just return, it transformed. Whisper's story had traveled farther than Ethan ever expected. What began as a single rescue from a forgotten canyon had become a living legend. People from all over the country wrote letters. Some wanted to meet the horse they'd seen in viral news clips. Others just wanted to say thank you because somehow hearing about him had helped them get through their own pain. Whisper wasn't just a horse anymore. He had become a symbol. And Ethan? He was no longer a man trying to disappear. He had become the voice for those who had no words, the steward of something greater than himself. It began with a boy named Lucas, 8 years old, didn't speak. Foster care system survivor, diagnosed with selective mutism after witnessing his sister drown during a camping trip. No school could help. No therapist had made a dent. His caseworker was desperate. She reached out to Timberline because she'd read about Whisper. I don't know what I'm asking, she told Ethan over the phone, but something in my gut says you might be the only place left for him. Ethan didn't hesitate. Bring him. Lucas arrived on a gray Thursday morning, hands buried in his hoodie, shoulders hunched, like he was expecting the world to hit him again. He refused to look anyone in the eye. When he stepped out of the car, he wouldn't move, until Whisper approached. The boy flinched at first. Then, still as a statue, he watched. Whisper didn't touch him, didn't make a sound, just stood there at a respectful distance, ears twitching in the wind. His breath puffed soft clouds into the morning chill. Then, slowly, Lucas stepped forward. 1 step. 2. He reached out a trembling hand, touched Whisper's cheek, and whispered, so quietly the caseworker gasped, "Hi." It was the first word he'd said in 2 years. More came. A veteran with PTSD who hadn't left his house in 8 months. A teenage girl recovering from an eating disorder. A woman who'd survived domestic violence and carried panic attacks like permanent shadows. One by one they arrived. One by one they found something no hospital or counselor had managed to give them. Safety, stillness, and presence. Whisper didn't perform tricks. He didn't nuzzle for treats. He simply was, and somehow, in that being, others found the space to breathe again. Ethan watched it unfold like a silent miracle, and slowly he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was why he'd survived. The media called it Whisper Ridge. It wasn't a name Ethan chose. It was coined by a reporter from a local station who did a story on Lucas and left in tears. She called it a place where the broken go to whisper and the wild chooses to listen. The name stuck. Ethan had the new sign carved in reclaimed wood and nailed to the gate. Whisper Ridge Healing Sanctuary. It wasn't just for animals anymore. It was for anyone who had been cracked by life and needed a space to rebuild. Whisper remained the anchor. He would often stand beside new arrivals, his quiet presence more powerful than any speech. When they were ready, they would approach him, and when they weren't, he'd simply be near, never pushing, never leaving. Ethan began offering weekend programs, equine therapy, mindfulness walks, survival training, even night hikes under the stars. But he always kept one rule: no one touches Whisper unless he chooses it. And somehow he always did. In May, Lauren brought news. "There's a conference," she said, holding out a flyer. "National Equine Therapy Alliance. They want you to speak." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "They want to hear about Whisper and your story." He shook his head. "I'm not a speaker." "You are now," she said, folding the paper and pressing it into his hand. "This is bigger than you." The event was held in Colorado Springs. Clean halls, polished boots, rows of professionals with degrees and data. Ethan stepped on stage in an old flannel shirt and jeans, still streaked from fence paint. He stood behind the podium, cleared his throat, and told them everything. About the fire, about Marlene, about the canyon, the bones, and the breath that refused to give up. He told them about a horse that never should have survived, and did. About a moment in the mud where two beings chose each other without words. And about what came next. He didn't cry, but a lot of others did. When he was done, the room gave him a standing ovation. Summer bloomed across Whisper Ridge. Green rolled down the valley like a painted wave, and the paddocks filled with flowers and life. Children laughed in the fields. Young veterans rode bareback under supervision. Animals healed. People rested. And Ethan began to build something permanent. He designed new cabins. Quiet, solar-powered, each facing the tree line. A library stocked with books on wilderness, psychology, and poetry. A small chapel with no cross, just a window overlooking the sunrise. Lauren moved in full-time. Dr. Carver volunteered 2 weekends a month. Even Jasper dropped in now and then, helping to expand the paddocks and add a trail system for gentle rides. It was no longer a rescue center. It was a community. built on the silence that healed. On the anniversary of the fire, Ethan climbed the ridge behind the sanctuary. He hadn't gone there in years. The scars were still there, blackened trunks, twisted steel, a burned patch where the watchtower once stood. He stood in the wind, the same wind that had once taken everything from him, and whispered, "I kept my promise." Behind him, hoofbeats. He turned. Whisper stood there, no halter, no rope, just the same quiet gaze. Ethan sat in the grass. Whisper lay beside him, and they watched the valley together, the place that had risen from ashes. The home they had built, not just for themselves, but for every soul that needed to know it wasn't too late, that it never was. A few weeks later, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single line, "Thank you for not turning your back on him. Because of that, I didn't turn my back on myself." Ethan placed it in a box beside other letters, each one a testament to something he never intended to create, but now couldn't imagine letting go. He walked out to the paddock, found Whisper beneath the oak tree, resting in the shade. He sat beside him. No words, just breath, just being. And as the wind stirred through the grass, carrying stories of pain and healing, silence and salvation, Ethan knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. If this story touched something deep inside you, just drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you're here, or a 0 if it left you speechless. Sometimes it only takes one quiet whisper to start a conversation. And if you want to hear more true stories like this, about people, animals, and the moments that change everything, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more heart-stirring journeys coming your way. See you in the next one.